demonstration, kind of a teaching tutorial that Jonah requested, so that he knows what I'm going to say, even though I don't generally know what I'm going to say anyway. But this is our Harris coreless steam engine, and it's one of the earlier pieces that were here at the museum. It was a gift from Jim Rockefeller, one of our original founders, and it ran the Cranston Print Works in Cranston, Rhode Island, and that was a factory that printed on fabric, not on paper. It was part of the fabric industry. And engines like this would run entire factories. If the factory was extremely large, they might have 2, 3, 4, as many engines as was required. And they were a cross-shaft driven factories. In other words, this engine drove cross shafts off of leather belts, and each one had pulleys on it where the belts came down and ran the individual machinery that was in there, whether it be a loom or a lathe or whatever that factory needed. If you travel around the countryside in Maine, you're going to see chimneys, brick chimneys up, and you might think that's just for heating or getting rid of waste or whatever. It's not true. These ran on steam, which required boilers, and the boilers had burners, and you had to get smokestacks. And so generally speaking, if you see a big chimney, it was because it had one of these in that factory running it. There's a couple of places where only the chimney remains. So again, this was out of the Cranston Print Works, and we'll travel this way a little bit. It's a 600 horsepower engine, which is quite a bit. I don't know what the torque rating is. It is a double acting compound steam engine. And what that means is double acting means that the pistons, and there are 2 pistons, one in this chamber, one in that chamber, and double acting means that the steam pushes the piston that way, and then the valving arrangement makes the steam go around the other side that pushes it back. So it's push, 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 push. That's double acting. Okay, compound means that it's using the steam more than once. In this engine, it's using the steam twice. The steam has a lot of power. It goes into this piston. That piston doesn't have, that cylinder doesn't have to be really big because the steam has a lot of pressure behind it, and it's pushing that primary piston back and forth. And then as the steam is wasted out of that cylinder, it goes over into this cylinder, which is larger because the steam doesn't have as much power behind it. It requires a larger surface area. And so there's your compound, double acting compound steam engine. When the steam is wasted out of that one and it has no practical use anymore, the pressure is so low, it goes into a condenser, which turns the steam back into water, and the water goes back into the boiler, and the boiler heats it up into high pressure steam again, and does that whole thing all over again. And that's what's doing it. Now, I get a lot of questions on what is this device up here, and of course when we're doing a real demonstration, all this is turning and moving. That's the governor, and the governor is like hitting your cruise control in your car. It's trying to keep the engine at a constant RPM. When there's more demand power-wise on the engine, and the engine starts to move slower, those 2 balls will start to move in, and it allows more steam into the engine. The engine picks up a little RPM, and now the balls start to fly out, reducing the steam going in. So you can choose the RPM that the engine is going to run, and it will keep that constant RPM within the limits of the usage. Why Harris coreless is a good question. Harris coreless held the patents on this complicated set of valving arrangement in this engine. All of these shafts, when the engine is turning, you'll see them doing this and this, and these will rise and fall. Those are dash pots, and they're air. They have cushions of air, and you can adjust how fast or slow they will fall. And what's happening here in these shafts, you have these valves, obviously. This is from the larger cylinder, and this is from the smaller one. And these are the steam valves. On a normal steam engine, you have a sliding valve which lets steam in very abruptly. Okay, and it's doing that. These valves turn, and you can adjust the speed that they open and close in all of this. And what that does is it helps you conserve steam. You can control how quickly the steam goes in or out, basically getting the most out of the engine on the least amount of steam. So if you're saving steam, you're saving fuel to make the steam. If you're saving fuel, then you're saving money, and everybody likes to save money. Personally, I like to spend it. But
Warren, when this was in Cranston
Yep.
and stuff like that, to have a giant steam engine like this, would the factory need to be located by like a river or a source of water for the water that they were always using for the steam?
Not necessarily. You know, you could get all the water you need out of a well for that because of the condenser. Okay, so the steam that you use on a 100% efficient engine, of which there is no such thing, but 100% efficient would mean that aside from the fuel it takes to make the heat, okay, that it could be a self-contained unit. So it's got that condenser. Think of a steam engine three ways in this direction: the boiler, the steam engine, and then the condenser going back to the boiler.
Gotcha.
Yep. And right here we have the Roper Steam Velocipede. Looks like a bicycle or a motorcycle, but Velocipede was the term of the time. And the time was right after the Civil War, 1868 maybe? I'd have to look at the sign. Man named Roper got the idea, and he was a machinist and a mechanic to build this thing. And if you look at bicycles of the time called bone shakers, it looks very similar, except for it's got this apparatus here. And what he's basically done is taken locomotive technology and miniaturized it. And so what you got to have here is basically a locomotive engine and boiler in a velocipede or bone shaker chassis, making it probably the first motorcycle that was had any practicality to it. This is the boiler down here. In the bottom is the burner. You chuck your coal in there, light it up, of course. And up here is the boiler. It's making the steam. And then here is your 2 cylinders and the valving arrangement. Just like the Harris Corliss, these are double acting piston cylinders, but it's not compound. It's not a compound engine. There are not 4 cylinders or multiple. Not in the same way that the Corliss did it. This uses the steam once, and it gets vented out the smokestack. One of the things I like on this is that it exhausts the steam in here and vents it up, which increases the draft down in the firebox. With the steam going up, it's drawing air through the firebox, which makes the fire hotter. The seat doubles as the water tank. Okay. You put the water in this little knob here and put it in the water. And another one of the things I like about this, because I'm a motorcycle guy, is your throttle. Actually, you turn the handle grip, and that's your throttle. If you turn the handle grip the other way, it's your brake. Similar to a modern motorcycle. He was thinking way ahead of his time. Now, there's only one of these in existence. There only ever was one. It's in the Smithsonian. And our volunteers chose this as a project, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And they went down to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian gave them permission to put their hands on the original, take measurements, photograph. Couldn't take it apart, but if you know steam engines, if you know the outside dimensions, you know the inside too. So they made this. It took them quite a while to make it. They were quite talented volunteers we had, and there's a lot of really good workmanship in this. This is just not an erector set sort of rebuild. This is very, very accurate, even down to the metal working that's in this. If you look at this whole thing very closely, you'll see, how did they make that? You know, it's really quite a rig.
Is the seat, Warren, is that leather or wood or metal? What is that?
It's metal with a leather covering. And it actually took quite a long time. It took years to find somebody who could do this. I remember this here early on. Everything was done except for the seat. And then finally, I don't remember who found the guy who knew a guy who did it. But that's how it ended up getting covered. And that's the way things work around here. We just don't put something together, poof, and it's together. Sometimes things take a long time, and you've got to kind of remember, oh yeah, we have this in storage, and maybe we ought to finish that, you know? There's another thing that I discovered about this too, is that there are some parts that aren't painted and some parts that are painted, and it doesn't look like something that our volunteers that were working on this would do. Like they quit right at a certain point. And I looked very closely at the pictures of the Smithsonian one, the one in the Smithsonian, and it looked like that the parts that aren't painted on this are not painted on that one either. So it is very accurate. From the roper, one thing I should mention about the roper is there was really no practical reason to have a motorcycle or anything. Roper did not build this to commute to work. His thing was doing something that nobody had done before, and what he would do with this is take it to velodromes, which are big buildings kind of like a roller skating rink, and he would demonstrate this and sell tickets to watch it operate. This was such a kind of like going to the moon sort of thing. People were extremely excited about seeing any new technology that was out there. They didn't even know the term technology, that's us. But he sold tickets to watch it operate, and that's how he made his money. From here, we jump forward about 35 years. This is a 1901 Locomobile steam engine. This came to the museum just here, have an engine. We used to get donations, and we still do, of things like this. And we quickly put together a demonstration stand because we didn't have the rest of the car. And that has morphed through the years to this one. Originally, it had a pink bicycle, kid's bicycle wheel and tire with a white tire on it. And that's not going to fly. So we ended up doing it again. It's kind of a cool rig. We're running these things on compressed air, not steam. We don't have a boiler here to run them, but steam engines run on air compressed air just like they would on steam without the heat. So in 1901, steam engines were just as popular for automobiles as gasoline or electric. And there began to be that social war or corporate war between gas, steam, and electric cars. This is the same kind of engine that's over there in that Prescott, which is the red and black car sitting there. So now we're powering a Model T wheel with it, which looks pretty much like it would have. But it's showing you all the gizmos here. In here, of course, is the piston. This is connecting rod, that's a connecting rod, and the crankshaft is back there. With steam, you don't need a transmission. The steam engine will go everywhere from right down to slow or up to fast. You don't need a transmission. Its power band is very wide, where a power band on a automobile, gas-powered automobile, is very narrow. All right. over here, and hopefully next year we'll have these things plumbed that we can run them in this room. We really should do that. This is a Model T engine that was built up out of junk parts last year. Dennis, one of our volunteers, led the charge on that, and this is going to become a teaching tool for those who come in and learn how to drive the Model T. So you can see a lot of stuff that will operate. It's color-coded for gas and electric, and the pedals, so that somebody that's learning the Model T can get an idea in their head of what's going on, because Model T's drive very different. Steering wheel looks the same. That's handy. So what we have sitting over here, and I talked about briefly, was the three automobiles where we kind of demonstrate that difference between gas, electric, and steam. We're working on a steam engine right now in the shop, 1904 Stanley Model B, and hopefully next year we'll be able to demonstrate that car, but we also have a 1900 Locomobile on the floor, which has this identical engine in it that we just looked at. And that belongs to John Harris, another trustee of the museum. And hopefully we can go out and demonstrate in real time the differences between an electric car, steam car, and gas car. But for in here, we have a 1912 Woods Electric, and it's just like the name implies, it's battery powered. There's the front row of batteries in it. These were very popular in cities because they were very powerful and they were very fast, although the advertising schemes would lead you to believe that they were. When you got them out there, you would discover they're not. Very heavy. But what they are is a simple, clean, social machine. They were popular among women, clean, you know, easy to drive. You don't have to crank an engine to start. Mm-hmm. And on level ground, they're fine as far as city speeds go. And they're social in the fact that in the back, the driver sits in the back seat, and the front passengers could have a decision whether they wanted to face forward or back. So actually, you could ride along in this face-to-face mm-hmm. and talk about what you're going to do when you get to the opera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the 1912 Woods Electric. This is turn of the century Prescott steam car, well restored, and it's typical of the steam cars between 1898 and 1905, 1904. They progressed. The advantages of steam were that they were very powerful and quiet, but they did consume fuel. They burned gasoline at the time in the boiler, and they were quite complicated to drive, and if it was sitting there cold, like this one is right now, it would take about a half hour to get it to go. So if you were in a hurry, you didn't want to go with steam. A lot of the people who use steam all the time would leave the pilot light on, and the next morning they'd fire it up and they could just go. But it was mostly the power and the speed that attracted people. And if you liked complicated things, steam was your car. You know, it really took learning to master a steam car. And then the last car we have in the line here is a 1912 Brush, and it has a single-cylinder gas engine under the hood. Quite simple to drive, but yes, you do have to crank it. And in the end of that competition between gas steam and electric gas won the war. Simply, well, for several reasons. One is that gasoline companies started to get really huge. And so another one of the reasons is cars like the Model T became so affordable that the electric and the steam cars were not as affordable. And by the time 1915 rolled around, cars were beginning to have electric starters, so they could be easily started by women. And advertising schemes now pulled in the female driver, and we've been driving gasoline cars ever since. But that kind of looks like we may not be driving them forever. But I think it'll be a while yet. That's my prediction. And this is a 28-cylinder aircraft engine. It's a cutaway, and it was used in a aircraft mechanics school. These are the engines that powered the World War II bombers in World War II, and then the airline industry, the airplanes in the airline industry after that. It's pretty interesting. It's a radial engine that has cylinders that go all the way around it, but they're stacked up. And you see one row of cylinders taken out. So if this engine was all together, everything would look like this. That's all you can see. Really interesting to watch the parts and pieces move in it. You have the piston going up and down right here. You can see that, and the valves opening and closing. This is the connecting rod. And these are flyweights, and they balance the engine when the engine is running at full RPM. They don't click when they're running at full RPM. They fly out, help balance the engine. And then up here you have a turbine which forces air into the intake manifold, and this would be what you might call a carburetor or fuel injection. So it's a complicated engine, a lot of parts in it, and that was kind of the apex of piston-powered aircraft engines at the time. After this, there's no advancement from this. This is the top. After this, we get into the turbofan engines, which is like what we have up there, that turbofan CF6. And now that's what if we get to jump on an airline and go somewhere, that's what's powering. And we had another trustee here at the museum, and he held patents on turbofan blades, which is pretty interesting. And I believe that's how this engine got here. He was able to do that. We also have a turbofan helicopter engine, which is in storage somewhere. That would be neat to get here. Then we move over here. This is our Otto engine, and again, turn of the century. And engines like this would power smaller factories or shops. This particular one powered a wood shop, and on an island off the coast of Georgia, I believe. Again, it's Mr. Rockefeller. It was a Rockefeller piece of property, and that was donated to the U.S. Park Service, and he was able to get the engine out of the shop before the property changed hands. It's a 20 horsepower engine. The piston in it is about that big around, and it would be a belted engine as well. It would have a pulley here, and the belt could go up to a cross shaft and do that. Otto, his claim to fame was the four-stroke principle. You drive a modern car today, you got here in a four-stroke engine car. There are also two-stroke engines, but they're like chainsaws and outboard motors and that kind of stuff. Not too many outboard motors four-stroke anymore, because the two strokes are oily and dirty for the environment. So they've been perfecting for decades. They've been perfecting four-stroke engines, and now just about everything that's gasoline powered is a four-stroke engine. But Otto, he's a guy in the picture over there. He held the patents on the four-stroke principle, And the four-stroke principle, since we're doing this on the video, I'll show you this. This is kind of a neat little thing here. We had somebody come in a year or so ago, I guess more than that, maybe 5 years ago, and said, do you want this? And it was, it needed to be restored, which we did. It's a cutaway, simple teaching tool on what a four-stroke engine does. Okay, so here's your crankshaft, connecting rod, piston, and valve, your carburetor, and your exhaust. And what happens is, piston goes up. Now that was a compression stroke, no valve open, and the spark plug fires, and the exhaust valve opens, and the piston pushes the exhaust out. Now the intake valve will open, and it sucks in the gas and air mixture and compresses it again and ignites it with the spark plug. And then exhaust, intake, compression, ignition, exhaust, compression, exhaust, intake, compression, and power. So that's what the four strokes are.
Okay.
Intake, compression, power, and exhaust. And that's what this engine is doing. You want to start this thing? Up to you. It's up to me. Just try it. Okay, let's see what we got here. Our fuel source is outboard motor tank, because we need to put more fuel in. This is the oiler. It's called the drip oiler. We just pull that little needle up, and now it's dripping oil into the cylinder. I'm going to give it a little help because we haven't run it in a couple of weeks. I'm going to shoot some oil directly into the cylinder. And I'm going to give the connecting rod. The other source of oiling is this little brass cap. It's got grease in it. You just wind it in, and it's pushing the grease in onto the connecting rod. And now we're going to start turning the engine. We can do that. Do you need me to push it back? I don't think so. I think I got it right here. You don't always have to do that. So we have a compression release here, and pulling this lever back is what does it. All right, you can start. There we go. Come on, that's it. Keep going. I wonder if it's got any fuel behind it. Oh, there we go. This hasn't run in a week or two. So there's, what is it, 1880, what, 80?
It's on the sign there.
95.
Okay, 1895 in action. What you got going here is the exhaust valve is over here, but the intake valve is here. It's called an atmospheric intake valve because it's not run off a cam. And this is the governor, just like over there on the Harris Corliss. Got a couple of balls underneath there, and it is driving this whole apparatus. And when the RPM drops, it starts allowing fuel in. This is your fuel valve. And when it goes fast enough, it'll quit moving. And that's cutting off the fuel from going into the engine. This is your pan for your exhaust valve. So basically that's it. We'll let that run for a minute. This is a DD-owned engine. And just like auto is kind of the grandfather of the four-stroke principle, DD-owned held the patents on an engine that has the flywheels inside the case, not outside the case. Even though this one has one on outside the case as well, it's inside the case. So this engine will run without any external moving parts. And Harley-Davidson still uses a DD-owned system today, and then some motorcycles, as do some others, and which is kind of interesting. DD-owned used to build engines for any kind of application. You could buy one to power a boat, or a clothes washer, or a motorcycle, or whatever. And they made them in various sizes. They were the largest engine manufacturer of their time. They made thousands of them. We have a DD-owned car in the collection as well. This is another engine that was just floating around. What are we going to do with it? And so we put it up on a display stand. It runs quite well, but right now the magneto's dead. We got to get that fixed. DD-owned. If you looked at a DD-owned engine, like 1905, and a Harley-Davidson engine, they're both fine. They look identical. These two models here are steam-powered pumping stations in Great Britain. And really, England was the grandfather country for steam-powered things. They just love steam power. And this contraption here was built.
Oh wow.
Was built to pump water out of mines. So in the house is the engine itself. It's just one piston, and the steam pushes it up, and then it just falls by itself, and then the steam pushes it up again. This is called a walking beam. This is the gizmo that's pumping the water. And the boilers are in that house over there. Hopefully we're going to get that lit. James Callahan says he wants to get it lit, so go for it. This is just a counterbalance that you can, because the whole thing is based on that balance, on a balance. The engine makes some power, but you've got to balance everything out for it to be able to pump out water. And that one over there is doing the same thing. Same concept, different model. There's your walking beam there. There's your steam engine up there. Boilers down under it. Any questions? We made our around the room.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Any questions?
That was great, Warren. Thank you.
Okay.